Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about Yoda and give a little mention to her cousin Mitai. We're going to discover that Yoda constitutes the other end of a sliding scale with the expressions of conjecture and likeness that we discussed in the last two lessons. At one end we have soda, at the other end we have Yoda, and in the middle we have Rashi. All of these expressions can be placed at the end of a completed logical sentence in order to express that that sentence is either what we've heard or what we conjecture from the information we have or from what we can see. But when we attach them to individual words, then we have this sliding scale of meaning. With soda, as we know, we use this to conjecture what the quality of something is. We can say, oishi soda. It looks delicious. I haven't tried it, but I think if I did, I would find it delicious. With rashi, we have a much greater degree of subjectivity. Rashi overlaps with soda in many respects, but it can also do things that soda cannot do. It can compare things to other things, to things that we know they aren't. We can say that an animal is usagi-rashi, rabbit-like, even though we know it isn't a rabbit. We can say that a person is kodomo-rashi, childlike, whether she is in fact a child or not. We are not necessarily conjecturing that the animal is a rabbit or the person is a child. We are just making that comparison. Now, Yoda can go much further. It can make an actual metaphor or simile. So, with Yoda, we can say such things as a sumo wrestler is like a mountain, or a person runs like the wind. Now, these are, if you like, literary style or poetic similes or metaphors. We are not saying that the wrestler is anything like a mountain except in the sense that he is big and solid. We're not saying that a person is in any way like the wind except that he's fast. And one of the ways we know when Yoni is acting in this way is that we can use the word marude with it. So we can say marude kaze no you ni tashita, run just like the wind. Literally, marude means roundly. Maru means a circle or a round. So when we say marude, we mean roundly, wholly, completely. And this is a hyperbole which is common to many languages, certainly including English. We might say in English, that wrestler is exactly like a mountain. We might even say, I literally froze to death. Now, that's the opposite of what we really mean. We don't mean that we literally froze to death. We mean that we figuratively froze to death. In literal reality, we appear still to be alive. We don't mean that the wrestler is exactly like a mountain. There isn't any snow on top of him. But the reason we say things like exactly and literally is to give emphasis to a poetic simile. And in Japanese, the usual collocation here is marude. And this also demonstrates the difference between Yoda, Yona, Yoni, and the other likeness-making expressions. You can't use marude with soda or sodas. You shouldn't use marude with rashi. It's out of place with those expressions. We use marude when we're going on a kind of poetic flight of fancy. It's a hyperbolic expression that signals the coming of a simile or a metaphor. When we say that a person is kodomo rashi or an animal is usagi rashi, we are extending reality a bit. We are comparing it to something that it could be but isn't. Now, if we look at the usage of these expressions, we can see that, as usual in Japanese, they're very logical. The textbooks will sometimes give you lists of connections and ways of using them. But actually they all make sense. We don't need a list to tell us that yoda can also be used as the adverb yoni, or that it can be placed before something as the adjective yona, because these connections are simply the same connections that you can make with any adjectival noun. The only thing we have to know is that just like rashi and unlike soda, we can use it with any kind of a noun, not just adjectival nouns. And that also makes sense because with both rashi and yoda, we can compare things to other things, whereas with soda, we can only conjecture at the quality of a thing, something that can be expressed by an adjective or an adjectival noun. And when we attach it to a verb, as we've seen, it has a slightly different meaning. However, yoda has a special connection that the others don't have. As you know, we can simply pop it onto an entire sentence as we can the other two, with the meaning of that sentence is what appears to be the case. But we can also put it onto an entire, complete sentence with a different meaning. We can do it in order to turn a whole sentence into our simile. So, for example, we can say, Marude yurei o mita ka no you na kao o shita. She had a face or made a face, exactly as if she had seen a ghost. Now, as we see, she had seen a ghost is an entire logical clause. In Japanese, we have the zero particle for she, but it's a complete logical clause. She saw a ghost. Yure o mita. Zero ga yure o mita. Now, then we put ka onto the end of it. What is this ka? We haven't talked an awful lot about the ka particle, because in Desumasu Japanese, you use it to mark a question. You can use it to mark a question in informal Japanese, which is what we usually use here, but mostly we don't, because paradoxically it doesn't seem polite to put ka on the end of an informal question. It tends to seem a little bit blunt or curt. However, the question marker ka has another important function, and that is that it can bundle a statement into a kind of question. And that's what's happening here. We start off with marude to signal that we are going to use a simile. Then we make our completed statement. Yure o mita. Zero ga yure o mita. She saw a ghost. And then we add ka, and that turns it into a question. It gives us our if, as if she had seen a ghost, and that ka gives us our questioning if. In fact, she hadn't seen a ghost. So this isn't really a statement, it's a possibility, a potentiality, an if. What she actually did perhaps was saw the fees that PayPal charged her for an international money transfer. We're not suggesting that she really saw a ghost. We are suggesting that the face she manifested, kao o shita, was similar to the face that she would have manifested if she had seen a ghost. Now, the other thing that we need to understand about this ka is that it, in effect, nominalizes the logical clause that it marks. So, what it's doing is turning this complete logical clause into a question, a hypothesis, an if, that then functions structurally as a noun. So, it can be marked by no, which can only happen to a noun. And so this new noun, this object that we've created from an entire logical clause, can now be connected to another noun by the particle no. Yo is a form or a likeness. Yama no yo is the form of a mountain. Kaze no yo is the form or likeness of the wind. And in this case, yure o mita ka no yo is the likeness of this object that we've created from the hypothesis of having seen a ghost. Now again, this is not something we can do with any of the others. We can't even do it with mitai, which works in most respects pretty much exactly the same as no yo. Mitai is the less formal cousin of yo and broadly means the same thing and broadly can be used in the same ways. It's an adjectival noun, just like that yo can be used with ni to make it an adverb, or with na to make it a before the noun adjective, just as any adjectival noun can be. The main things to remember about it is simply that it's less formal, so you don't use it in an essay. On the other hand, you might prefer to choose it when you're talking to a friend over yoda in many cases, just because it sounds a bit less formal and a bit more friendly. But you can't use it with a completed sentence. You can use it with a complete sentence in order to conjecture that that statement is the case, but you can't use it with ka to use a complete sentence as a simile. You have to use ka no yoda, ka no yoni for that. The other thing to note is that sometimes, probably because it is very casual, the da or des gets left off from mitai. You might say marude hitsuji mitai, just like a sheep. This isn't correct grammar. You ought to say mitai da, but it's very common to leave it off. It's not common to leave it off of yoda. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.